What if I told you that Hamilton's brake failure in Singapore wasn't just a fluke, but a sign that Ferrari is facing a hidden technical crisis? What did Fred Vasseur discover that could change the team's destiny this season? What should have been just another race on the calendar quickly became the epicenter of a technical crisis for Ferrari. The 2025 Singapore Grand Prix, one of the most demanding and treacherous street circuits on the calendar, revealed an anomaly in the performance of the SF25 driven by Lewis Hamilton. But this anomaly was not evident to everyone. It did not manifest itself in a visual malfunction, nor in a sudden failure that forced the pilot to withdraw. It was a set of subtle details, inconsistencies barely noticeable to the casual viewer, but impossible to ignore for someone with the experience and clinical eye of Fred Vasseur. During qualifying, particularly in Q2, the team began to detect discrepancies between the car's behavior on the track and the simulation data that had previously been analyzed in Maranello. The car's sensors sent information that did not fit with the aerodynamic simulations or predictive models. It was not a minor discrepancy. Curve after curve, the car reacted differently than expected, as if there were a hidden variable completely altering the dynamics of the vehicle. Faced with this situation, Fred Vasseur made an unprecedented decision. He ordered immediate intervention in the middle of the qualifying session, an action that is normally reserved for absolute emergency situations. The order was clear: perform a complete crossover between the real-time telemetry of Hamilton's car and the simulation maps generated before the weekend. This tool, normally used in post-race analysis, was activated in real time during qualifying, breaking all the usual protocols. What the engineers discovered was shocking. The simulation maps defining ideal braking points, downforce levels, energy recovery and torque curves did not match at all with what Hamilton was executing on the track. It was as if the driver was driving a completely different car. Every corner entry, every braking phase, every moment of acceleration was altered, adapted and corrected manually by Hamilton. It was not an improvisation. He was an elite driver with 7 world titles under his belt, modifying his style in real time to compensate for what was clearly anomalous behavior of the car. While other drivers relied on predefined parameters and instructions from the wall, Hamilton made autonomous decisions, reconfiguring his reference points lap by lap. Without orders from the pits, without suggestions from the race engineer, the Briton was flying blind. And yet, he kept the car competitive. For Ferrari engineers, this was a disconcerting revelation. On the one hand, it confirmed the genius of the pilot, his ability to detect microfaults that the telemetry itself barely captured. On the other hand, it made it clear that the car had much deeper problems than a simple setup error or a poor choice of settings. What Hamilton was compensating for manually was not due to driving errors or changing circuit conditions. It was something structural. Something embedded in the DNA of the SF25. And that something was about to come to light. What at first seemed like atypical behavior by the driver or even a reaction to the evolution of the circuit ended up triggering an unprecedented technical investigation within Ferrari. As soon as the Singapore Grand Prix ended, Fred Vasseur called an emergency technical meeting with those responsible for telemetry, reliability, and aerodynamics. The priority was one: to understand why a driver of Hamilton's caliber had to drive the entire weekend blind, improvising on each lap to keep the car under control. The first concrete signs emerged from the post-race analysis of the brake-by-wire system. This hybrid technology, which combines conventional hydraulic braking with the energy recovery of the MGUK system, is essential in today's cars. It is responsible not only for stopping the car with millimeter precision, but also for storing electrical energy that can later be used to propel the car during key accelerations. The balance between both systems is fragile. If one fails, the other collapses. And that's exactly what happened. Telemetry revealed that during the second stint of racing in the middle stint, where thermal management is critical, the rear brake temperature shot beyond the safety threshold. An unexpected thermal spike in the system caused a gradual loss of hydraulic pressure. But the problem was not only mechanical. The failure was amplified by a series of decisions in the design of the SF25 that were now impossible to ignore. When engineers analyzed the airflows under the car in detail, they discovered that the rear brake cooling system had been compromised in the name of aerodynamic performance. The flat-bottom architecture, specifically designed to channel airflow and maximize ground effect, created high-pressure zones that altered the efficiency of the brake vents. The result: the rear brakes were operating on the verge of thermal collapse without the team knowing. But the real blow was something else. During a turn-by-turn telemetry review, technicians detected a sudden drop in hydraulic pressure just exiting turn 10. At that point on the circuit, 4.5G braking is typically applied. Hamilton, on the other hand, was barely generating 40% of that force. Not by choice, but because the system simply did not respond. It was at that moment when Ferrari understood that they were not facing a specific failure, but rather a systemic threat. The brake-by-wire had failed not because of a breakage or defective part, but because the thermal environment of the SF25 had pushed it to its limits. The alarming thing is that this environment was created by design decisions made in winter, decisions that had not been reviewed in extreme conditions like those in Singapore. This revelation was a turning point. The team realized that the SF25 had not only been outpaced by the competition, but that its internal architecture was at war with the very systems it was meant to protect. It was a conflict between aerodynamic efficiency and mechanical survival. And in this case, the former had sacrificed the latter. As if that were not enough, a second design review revealed that the temperature sensors in the rear brakes were placed in an area with thermal interference. That means that even the real-time data reaching the pit wall was not reliable. The team was flying without precise instruments, and that explained why Hamilton had to rely exclusively on his feelings. The discovery was devastating. The car, as conceived, had an Achilles heel. A structural weak point that no setup, strategy, or driving style could compensate indefinitely. At that moment, Ferrari stopped wondering why the car had failed. He began to wonder how many more times he could fail, and if they still had time to avoid a major technical debacle in the remainder of the championship. When Ferrari engineers finished analyzing the data, it was clear that they were not dealing with a simple technical anomaly. It was not a configuration error or a materials problem. The brake system failure in Singapore was just the visible symptom of a much deeper problem. The SF25 was built on a defective foundation. It all went back to the team's obsession with recovering lost ground in the aerodynamic battle against McLaren and Red Bull. Since the winter, Ferrari had opted for an aggressive reinterpretation of ground effect. They completely redesigned the flat bottom of the car with the aim of generating more downforce without increasing drag. At first glance, it was an ingenious solution. They narrowed the air channels, modified the vortex generators, and redesigned the rear diffuser. All this was to give the SF25 superior balance in medium and fast corners, without compromising the straights. But that innovation brought with it unforeseen consequences. Subsequent studies showed that by prioritizing the aerodynamic channeling under the car, an overpressure zone had been created that partially blocked the entry of fresh air to the rear cooling ducts. And that air is not only essential for cooling the brakes, it is also essential for keeping the MGUK, the electric inverter, and other critical components of the hybrid system in optimal operation. What seemed like a design genius ended up compromising the thermal integrity of the entire rear axle. The discovery in Singapore not only exposed a weakness of the car, it also exposed a fragility in Ferrari's development process. A tendency to prioritize innovation over validation, design over reliability. And in a sport where the driver's confidence depends millimeters on the behavior of the car, that fragility can be the difference between fighting for the championship or simply surviving in the upper middle zone. When the dust settled on the illuminated streets of Singapore, the atmosphere in the Ferrari pit was one of contained tension. What had started as a technical anomaly became a devastating confirmation. The SF25 was built on a critical structural weakness. What had been hidden during the first races of the season thanks to the talent and experience of Lewis Hamilton had exploded at the worst possible moment, in the most demanding scenario on the calendar. The first option is to operate a deep redesign during the season. This would involve diverting resources, freezing parts of the planned development, and working against the clock to rebuild the floor of the car, review the brake system, and recalibrate the entire aerodynamic structure. It is a titanic task that could seriously compromise performance during subsequent races. Furthermore, any major modification must be approved under the strict budget limits of the current technical regulation. That is, a calculation error not only risks points, it also exposes the team to sanctions and development penalties. The second option, and perhaps the most dangerous, is to do nothing. Bet on partial solutions. Redirect the airflow with small modifications, readjust the brake-by-wire system to operate under more conservative conditions, and rely on the talent of its pilots to minimize the impact. This containment strategy can be effective in circuits with lower thermal demands, but it is unsustainable in the long term. Every race held without addressing the core of the problem is a lost opportunity and a latent threat. The immediate future will be a litmus test for Fred Vasseur's technical direction, for the engineer's reaction capacity, and for the mental resistance of his pilots. The question is not whether the SF25 will fail again, but whether Ferrari can rebuild its path before it is too late.